Good morning, everybody. Dr. Vasquez coming to you live, and today we are going to talk about music. And I've made several posts over the last couple of years about music kind of as a tangent or just kind of a diversionary, kind of eclectic mix of different conversations. But today I'm actually going to provide a little more structure to that conversation because when I was looking at, I was in a conversation by email with one of my favorite musicians who I'll mention in a few minutes. And in the course of that conversation, I was telling him my way of appreciating music, obviously as a listener and nowhere near a professional musician, of course. But I was telling this very accomplished musician about certain perspectives I had and some of the research that supported that perspective. And then, of course, I started looking at the research more, and for that reason, we're having this conversation right now. So one of the articles of several that I looked at the other day was this one that I'm going to review right now. And this is going to be kind of the centerpiece of today's conversation. This article, obviously appropriately titled The Mozart Effect, that's kind of the basis for this concept and the things that I'm going to talk about within that concept and then kind of extend from there. This article is really good. It's maybe about 3 pages, published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, April 2001. So I'm going to provide a reading of that article kind of in the middle of this conversation. So I'm going to introduce a few topics, then we'll take a look at the entirety of the article. And then I'll give you, some of my deeper, perhaps, perspectives. I haven't prepared this particular conversation, even though I have a few ideas kind of floating around in my head. And that's going to be, obviously, somewhat of a task to kind of herd those cats into something that appears to be a linear conversation. So I had good and bad luck in my youth, as I assume most of us did. But one stroke of good luck occurred when I was living in Houston, Texas. I was about 20 or 21 years old. And, back in the day, especially in Houston, Texas, which has got to be one of the most boring cities in the world, I remember some Friday night or Saturday night, I assume, I went out with my friends and we went to a record store. And back in the day, this would have been 1991-ish. It was between 1991 or 1992, because I remember having a conversation about this in 1992, so it obviously had to happen before then. So 1991 or 1992, I'm just out with the guys and we went to a music store. And, back in the day, we bought physical records, like disc records, or we bought audio cassettes. In fact, I might even I do have an audio cassette, but it's in my other piece of furniture. And, the technology wasn't such that we could sample a piece of music before we bought it. We just had to buy it and hope that it turned out to be okay. So, whatever. I'm walking down the aisles of this music store and they've got records in one section and then audio cassettes in another section. Some of you might not even know what an audio cassette is because it's not really technology that anybody uses anymore. I'll show you what an audio cassette is. For those of you who don't know, I think I have one over here. Yeah. So here's an audio cassette, which I have likewise, I've carried this around now for 25 years, this audio cassette. So like I was saying, back in the day, when we went to buy music, we either had to know something about it or we just had to go for luck. And so I still remember, this was a record store on a big street in Houston, Texas called Westheimer. And I remember coming down the aisle, I made a turn to the left, and in front of me was an audio cassette titled Primal Magic by Strunz and Farrar. And I didn't know anything about them. I had no way of sampling the music. I had no way of being, previously exposed to that music. But I just looked at the cassette and it had a pretty picture on the cover. And back in the day, that's what we did. And that's how we purchased music. So I ended up buying not this particular cassette, but a cassette of their music. And I have to say that changed my life. So again, I was more or less 20 years old, 21 maybe, but between 20 and 21. And so that was a musical experience that I had. I'll talk about it more in this conversation. That was a musical event, so to speak, for me. Actually, I had 3 musical events around that time. But that was one of them that really changed my life. The other musical event that happened for me around that age was I was listening to the radio, and they played a song by the Sundays, and they were a quartet, as I recall, from the UK. And I remember liking one of their songs, and then I actually called I think I called the DJ. That's what we did back in the day, you know. And I said, "Hey, you just played this song, and I want to buy it. I want to know more about it, who it was." And they said, "Oh, that was the Sundays." And so I ended up buying it. I bought a used CD of their music, as I recall, and at a place called Record Rack, which was also on Lower Westheimer. And that also changed my life. So, but the first change that I attributed to Strunz and Farrar was from the complexity and the tonality of their music. The way that the Sundays kind of changed my life was through their lyrics. And the theme, or a theme, of their music is not very intellectual. It's very touchy-feely, and but that's exactly the point. I kind of needed that at that point in my life. I don't recall the lead singer's last name, but I think her first name was Harriet, and I liked their music, and because I listened to their music, I therefore obviously had to listen to the lyrics. And at some point, you know, those lyrics kind of changed some of my perspectives. Again, not because they were intellectual, but because they weren't intellectual. And they were just kind of like touchy-feely, go with the flow kind of thing. And I didn't have a lot of that in my life at the time. So I do feel like their music also changed my life, because in order to listen to the music, I had to listen to the lyrics. And over time, listening to the lyrics gave me perspectives that at that time were outside of my personal experience, whether my family, my city, or my social experience. So either today or in another video, I'll talk more about that if necessary. But I'll give you a sample of, well, I'll play the part of her song that kind of changed my life. Again, I was like really, at that point in my life, I had just gotten out of military school, you know, around that age. I was very disciplined. I was studying. I was, you know, trying to create this career path for myself. And I was thinking, man, I'm going to study this, and then I'm going to study this, and then I'm going to study this, and all this kind of stuff. But I also needed, you know, some influence in my life that was more about like just taking it easy. And I had a friend at the time, and he was kind of a surfer dude. And yeah, he was that as well. But the music was a bit more explicit and kind of changed some of my perspectives. The other event that I just thought of while I was already in this conversation is around 1991 or 1992, the Lollapalooza Festival came to Texas, and they played 2 consecutive days. in Dallas, Texas. And I went to that. I bought a ticket, 2 tickets, one for myself and another for a friend of mine who ended up not coming. He was living in Georgia at the time, or Alabama. So I bought a ticket for him. He couldn't make it. So I ended up using the tickets myself. But I drove myself from Houston to Dallas, went to the concert, and then drove myself home that night. But that was also kind of a life-changing event for me because, again, coming from kind of the restricted social environment of Houston, Texas, including my family there, that was a life-changing event for me because it was the first time I'd ever seen like people just kind of exuberantly happy. And then pretty soon thereafter, I would see the same thing in Seattle, Washington, and a trip that I made there. I've talked about that before, but I guess those are from my own experience, 3 ways that I think about music in terms of like music as something that can actually change your life, or in this case, change my life. One is through the structure of the music itself, and that's what I get from Struns and Farah, and I have gotten it consistently for 30 years, I guess, 30 years of my life. And I will always appreciate that and respect that has happened. The other way, beyond the structure and the tonality or complexity of music or the structure of the music, is the influence of lyrics, Because if I like a song or if you like a song, we're going to listen to the song. And if it has certain lyrics, we have to be aware of what those lyrics are telling us. In my case, I was aware of it and I wanted what the lyrics were telling me, even though I wasn't really at that time like fully prepared to live those lyrics per se. I was aware that the lyrics represented for me something I didn't have in my own social experience. And so it was a way of being exposed to new ideas that could pose some benefit, but could also pose some risk, because any idea can be risky if taken out of context or if misapplied, I suppose, or if applied in an imbalanced way. But what I did need at my time in that life was just to be a little lighter, and that's what that music helped me achieve. And the third part of my musical experience or musical awakening or whatever was just seeing the effect that a musical environment could have on people and just letting them be happy. So for me, that I'd never seen anything like that, like this wild music festival with like Henry Rollins, who's also had a lot of influence on me when I was younger. But it was Henry Rollins, Jane's Addiction, Ice-T, a group called Fishbone. And yeah, it was just a wild, happy, free music festival.
Ugly. You and me. You see the real me.
Yeah, it was just a wild, happy, free music festival. So anyway, those are kind of some experiences that I'll weave into today's conversation or into another conversation. I did write some extensive notes. You obviously know that I never write extensive notes, but I did write a few notes. Oh yeah, I was talking about like the danger. I mentioned the danger of music and the danger, especially of musical lyrics. So it's just something that I think we have to be aware of. And I've been aware of this for many years, even though I've never talked about it. But I do remember when I was growing up, again in Houston, Texas, we just listened to what was ever on the radio. And because we didn't have no one was carrying around a digital phone where you could control, the exact song that you want to listen to at that moment. You just listened to what was ever on the radio or what you had in your cassette player. And I am aware, of course, reflecting on this more as an adult, but maybe even then it bothered me, even though, of course, I didn't have the language to describe what was happening. But I am aware now, and I remember being affected by this, but like I said, I didn't know how to get out of it or how to describe it more accurately. But, back then when we couldn't select our music and we just listened to what was ever on the radio, some of that music had a negative influence on many of us and probably still does. I mean, a lot of music these days is just junk, but people have, for better or for worse, they have more control over what they listen to. So in my case, if I'm listening to a song and I have some control over it, I can choose to skip it or delete it to not listen to it again. But, back in the day when we didn't have so much control, we were forced to listen to the completion of the song and hope that the next one was better. But what I'm getting around to saying is a lot of those songs had, I think, a negative influence, potentially on me, but certainly on the culture as a whole, because a lot of those songs are just stupid, So, musicians and singers get an audience based on the popularity, or maybe the music is good and the lyrics are junk, and so they sell, 8 million copies. But let's assume for a moment that the music is good and the lyrics are junk, because usually the lyrics are junk. They're not going to convey anything of meaning or complexity. They're just going to convey whatever the singer or the songwriter is thinking of at the moment. It could be a drunk night doing stupid stuff. And then that becomes a song and it sells millions of copies. And then you've got literally tens of millions of people being influenced by those ideas, even though the ideas themselves maybe have no value or they have a negative value. And I know that, a lot of the music in the 70s and 80s was really codependent. And it was all about, devotion and love and just flat out codependence. But a lot of us were exposed to that type of music when we were at such a young age. We didn't even know what love was or what love should be or what love really is. So, a lot of us were raised on these fantasy and really stupid and kind of deformed and codependent versions of so-called love that we learned from, popular culture, whether it's movies or television shows, but especially music, because music is very repetitive, So let's say that some producers, make a stupid movie about being emotionally codependent. I mean, there's plenty of movies like that and television shows too. But one of the two distinctions there are, even if you were to watch that particular movie 2 or 3 times, it's only 2 or 3 times. And usually, especially back then, we didn't have the power to even, rewind a television show, let alone watch it whenever we wanted. But with music, we can be exposed to a given song hundreds of times. And if it has, socially dysfunctional lyrics, let's say, or codependent lyrics, then we're going to be exposed to it and exposed to it and exposed to it. And it can influence the way that we think about things, just in terms of volume of repetition, but also the fact that it has music obviously in the background. So you've got these codependent or dysfunctional lyrics on repeat, accompanied by music, and I think that kind of helps it kind of sink into the brain at a deeper level. Anyway, that's just an idea. So anyway, back to this article, which is the focus of today. It's kind of the conversation piece of the day. So again, I'll introduce this, we'll look at the article, and then I'm going to tell you what I think are the big take-home messages from this article. So that was my scoping and personal introduction to this article. Let's look at this article now. Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, 2001. I used to be a member of the Royal Society of Medicine when we lived in Europe, but it's just a social group. I mean, they have a nice venue, because I've stayed in their hotel a few times in London. They've got a really nice client or member hotel that's really nice. And then they have another one that's just like medical barracks, and that one's pretty lame. And they also have like a meeting club and a restaurant, things like that. So it's an actual physical location, the Royal Society of Medicine. But anyway, it's basically just kind of a social club. But they do have a journal. Maybe I'll publish something there eventually. So the Mozart Effect, Royal Society of Medicine, 2001. In 1993, these researchers made the surprising claim that, I'm going to talk about this song in just a minute. I'll give you a sample of this song because I don't like it. But it is considered an exemplary piece of very structured and very sophisticated music. And you'll see that that's kind of a recurrent theme when we talk about the Mozart Effect. So in 1993, these people made the surprising claim that after listening to Mozart's sonata for two pianos, K448, for 10 minutes, normal subjects showed significantly better spatial reasoning skills compared to a control group that just listened to whatever. Mean spatial IQ scores were 8 and 9 points higher after listening to the music than in the other two control conditions, and the enhancing effect only lasted for 10 minutes. Well, if they only listened to the music for about 10 minutes, then you would expect a short-term effect. You wouldn't expect that someone's going to listen to one song for 10 minutes and then have an effect forever. So it was a short-term exposure followed by a short-term modification in brain function. And so again, the way that I'm going to structure this after my, kind of personal intro and segue is introduce this article, go through the article, and then I'm going to tell you what I think this article conveys in terms of importance. So let's take a look at the article again. I'll start obviously with the first paragraph. So after listening to Mozart's sonata for two pianos, again, it's K448. I'll give you some samples of that right now so that you can at least know what they're talking about. That particular piece of piano music, again, obviously from Mozart, is the one that's most commonly been used to demonstrate this Mozart effect, which is a